potential responding agencies.
Thank you.
Next up is Mo Clark with Colorado Newswire.
Hi there. We've talked a lot about the recommendations that were outlined, and I'm wondering if you could provide some specifics on when we can expect an implementation plan and how you will make that process transparent to the public.
Mo, thank you. Our plan here is that we will put up a dashboard on our website that will list the 16 recommendations. It'll have a direct link to the Office of Independent Monitors report, and we will list completion of each one of these recommendations. As I stated, many of which we have, several of which we have. The others, we will put timelines to say we will have this done by this month and this year, and then that way the community can see and hold us accountable for implementing the recommendations that the Office of Independent Monitor has outlined.
Next question is from Deborah Takahara, Fox 31.
Hi, thank you. Any idea how much money these 16 recommendations will cost?
I do not have a hard dollar amount for these 16 recommendations. We have implemented several of these. There were some costs associated with getting the Velcro badge number that would then fix to the protective gear. There were some costs associated with being able to apply the body cam to the protective padding. We will work to get that information, and then we will add it to that website if there are costs associated in implementing the 16 recommendations.
And I imagine training will be part of that cost?
Deborah, yes, we agree with the Office of Independent Monitors report. Again, just because we haven't seen anything like this in several decades, we need to make sure that our teams are trained for any type of spontaneous violent protests, so we can ensure that our officers, our responders, do so in accordance with the policy, both the operations manual policy and the crowd management policy. And we do.
Finally, can you give us an update on the officers that were injured during this time?
Deborah, thank you. Yes, at least 81 officers in the first few days of the George Floyd protests / riots were injured. We had many officers that were struck with rocks and bottles, explosives like fireworks, officers that were struck by vehicles. We still have officers that have not returned back to work. It is unfortunate that anybody sustained serious bodily injury as a result of this, both community members and officers. And we want to make sure that these recommendations are adhered to, as well as other areas. If we can learn from community members, if we can learn from other cities on smart practices or best practices, so we can reduce, mitigate, and prevent serious bodily injury from anybody with regards to the challenges that we faced back then, as well as any types of challenges we may face in the future.
Thanks, Deborah. We've got Connor with Westward.
Hey, Chief. Question is, what recommendations do you disagree with?
Connor, thanks for bringing that up. Again, I want to commend the monitor and his staff for this very detailed report. I think it outlines much of what we saw with regards to the response and the actions that we saw. I think that it is also important for all of us to recognize the context where we were as a society during this, what led up to this, the divide that we saw in our country, the fear, stress, and anxiety surrounding the pandemic, the fear and stress and anxiety related to economic downturns, that this was the perfect storm. And I don't know if it's possible to put the words on paper to really show the challenges that not only the city of Denver faced on May 28th when we witnessed arguably the most horrific killing, the police violence that occurred in Minneapolis, that impacted all of us. It's hard to contextualize everything that was going on that day that led us to this space. We agree with the 16 recommendations, and we are going to work hard to improve and adhere to the monitor's report in all 16 of them. There's one that's a little bit of a challenge, and that's a recommendation for a metro-wide policy, a metro-wide use of force crowd control policy. But we, as we've discussed, we will work with other law enforcement leaders in the area to identify gaps, so that way we can better address these types of challenges in the future.
Great. Can you just kind of talk about that a little bit more? Why that recommendation for making sure that all the mutual aid partners are operating under the DPD use of force policy is a challenge?
Well, Connor, it's certainly a challenge just because now we would be asking officers from multiple departments to learn our policy, to learn our training. However, we are committed to working with our law enforcement leaders, with the other law enforcement agencies in the metro area. We as a profession want to improve, and this gives us an opportunity to do that. So there's part of this that is beyond our purview. We can't dictate that jurisdiction A or jurisdiction B would adhere to this exact policy, but we will be working together to ensure that we can become in compliance with the recommendations.
Does anyone on the phone have any questions? If you're on the phone and you don't know how to unmute yourself, it's *6. All right, then I think we're going to wrap this up. Chief, Director Robinson, do you have any closing words?
Well, what I want to point out is that the executive director, myself, the leadership team in the city, to include city council, we want to learn from this and ensure that any of the gaps or the shortfalls don't occur in the future. I want to again commend the Office of Independent Monitor, Nick Mitchell, and his staff for the countless hours that they did providing this document that we certainly can learn from. We also need to look at the conditions and how we as a community can ensure that we never have anything like this occur again. The violent protests, we need to make sure that our responses are in line with our values as a city, and this is a step in that right direction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. The DPD PIOs sent out an email right before the press conference with the Denver Police response to each of the 16 recommendations from the OIM. If you did not receive that document, feel free to reach out to me or directly to DPD and we'll make sure you get it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
I don't even have words. So I didn't know this was going to happen. All I knew that the report would be released today. Evidently, it was released last night, or at least the Denverite got hold of it. And Dave Sachs tweeted about it this morning.
The Monitor's report. The limitation or the challenge really surrounded that protective equipment, that protective gear. You may recall seeing officers in what's commonly referred to as turtle gear. It has about an inch and a half thick protective padding. The body cameras themselves, they are deployed utilizing magnets. So on a traditional uniform, you have one set of magnets on the outside, one set on the inside, and that's the retention for the body cam. The challenge was being able to mount those body cams to the protective gear that our officers needed. We had to develop a workaround for that so we could physically attach the body cams to that protective gear. And that's part of the limitations here, but the report also outlines additional areas where we can improve, and we agree with that. We will make those changes so that way we do have body cam footage for all of our officers, supervisors, and staff.
I mean, is that acceptable, especially in a situation like this when you know that every action is going to be called into question and scrutinized? Is it acceptable for officers not to have those cameras on?
Of course, we want to document the officer's performance, and that's one area where body cams have been very useful in identifying the actions of misbehavior or appropriate behavior by our officers. We had significant limitations when putting on that protective gear and being able to mount that body camera to the protective gear. It does not allow that under the traditional attaching system. We had to develop a workaround in order to do that. And I do want to point out that we did not have months leading up to this as we did for the DNC, where we could have identified this type of gap and then addressed it. And I also want to point to the fact that the DNC in 2008, body cams were not part of the department's response to these types of situations. So some of those lessons learned from 2008 with regards to body cams, we weren't able to bring that specific issue forward. It is a gap. We will have corrected this. We have figured out how to do the workaround with the body cams as well as the badge numbers, and that is an area that has been addressed and corrected.
Do that.
And just lastly, too, I was wondering how you plan to better catalog less lethal force in the future and those munitions that may be used.
Liz, again, we agree with the report. I think the monitor points out some very specific recommendations on how we can improve that inventory. We're in full agreement of that, and we will ensure that that takes place moving forward.
What?
Okay, next question is from Lori Jane Gleha with Fox 31.
Hi, I was going to ask a little bit about, there's references in the report about officers firing upon non-physically resistant protesters or people in the crowd. And then that the use of force forms that are required in the operations manual were vague and often very delayed. So I'm just curious why this was allowed to happen. And I'm also curious why some untrained officers were allowed to use weapons for which they did not have certification or training.
So, Lori Jane, I think that was about 3 questions, right?
Yep, all wrapped into one.
All wrapped into one. Okay. Lori Jane, I think we addressed the training with the certification. We will make sure that officers are properly certified with the tools moving forward. We agree with that recommendation. This was unprecedented. We needed every officer that we could get to try to reduce and prevent the level of violence that we were seeing, the level of destruction arson that we were seeing. The report talks about 200 arsons that took place in this. The report also talks about the weapons that were involved, firearms that folks had brought to these protests, which made it extremely challenging. We will utilize this recommendation for your point, the training, to make sure that our officers have the appropriate training on the particular tools that they have or need in order to address this. But to the second question that I think was woven in there, when we're talking about the reporting, we have made changes in these crowd situations to do reporting on that same day. I'll use the example where I just talked about the unprecedented nature of this, the long, sustained 12 hours, 14 hours that officers were working in these situations under a traditional or a typical use of force that we would see under normal circumstances. The officers involved, the supervisors, they come into the station, they complete the paperwork there. Often it takes an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to complete. We did not have that luxury when we're still trying to keep people safe, when we needed every officer that we could get out in these areas in order to prevent future violence, in order to prevent future destruction that we were seeing. And we have since worked to rectify that situation. We're in agreement with the report. We'll make sure that use of forces, and we have since then are documented on that day and have the appropriate information.
And the last part of that was just why were officers firing at people who were non-physically resistant and only verbally engaging with officers?
That aspect of this is part of the ongoing investigations here. We will hold individuals accountable for violating policy.
I thought you found they didn't violate policy.
Next up is Julia Carty with Difford Gazette.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, Julia.
Great. Let me see, my internet went out for a moment, so I apologize if these questions have already been asked. But first question,
Basically,
why didn't the department produce officer rosters of those assigned to the protests for, I believe it was May 20 through May 31st?
The simple answer is that this caught us off guard, just like it caught many cities across the country off guard. The level of intensity, the level of violence that we saw here. We have a long, successful history of being able to manage First Amendment activities, get people safely from point A to point B. The level of violence that we saw here really changed that dynamic, and our team was out there for 12, 14 hours and beyond. It's an oversight. It's an oversight that won't happen in the future. It's an oversight that has been corrected with subsequent protests since.
And my other question is that the report also notes some deficiencies in organizing support from other law enforcement agencies to respond. In the future, what steps might you take to better organize response from other agencies, in a situation like this with little warning?
Again, we agree with the report. We can and will do better moving forward. We plan to bring metro area chiefs and sheriffs together so we can really dig deep in this, identify. We have to recognize that the spontaneous nature of this is something that could happen in the future. Just because we haven't seen anything like this in decades doesn't mean that we won't see something like this in the future. And it's incumbent on us to take this recommendation serious and do better preparation and training, coordination and communication amongst the potential responding agencies.
Thank you.
Next up is Mo Clark with Colorado Newswire.
Hi there. We've talked a lot about the recommendations that were outlined, and I'm wondering if you could provide some specifics on when we can expect an implementation plan and how you will make that process transparent to the public.
Mo, thank you. Our plan here is that we will put up a dashboard on our website that will list the 16 recommendations. It'll have a direct link to the Office of Independent Monitors report, and we will list completion of each one of these recommendations. As I stated, many of which we have, several of which we have. The others, we will put timelines to say we will have this done by this month and this year. And then that way the community can see and hold us accountable for implementing the recommendations that the Office of Independent Monitor has outlined.
Next question is from Deborah Takahara, Fox 31.
Hi, thank you. Any idea how much money these 16 recommendations will cost?
I do not have a hard dollar amount for these 16 recommendations.
All right, so there you go. It was an impromptu press conference. Clearly, none of us were ready for it. By Chief Officer Pazen, Chief of Denver Police Department, addressing the grotesque mismanagement that the Office of the Independent Monitor discovered. We're going to be talking about this tomorrow at the City Council committee meeting for safety and housing, or as I like to call it, state-sanctioned killing of Black people and the unhoused. I'll be live streaming that. It starts at 10 o'clock. There's an opportunity for public input. I'm going to be putting the link here at the bottom. There are 15 minutes. Everybody gets 2 minutes each. I say get in there and get something to say. The form opens up for signups starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. I've got an alarm in my calendar ready to go. But if you got something to say, get in line and get ready to say it. I'll be live streaming it. And then later in the evening, there'll be a second meeting about this that is being conducted by the Office of the Independent Monitor. And I will be streaming that to all platforms as well. Let me know. Do whatever it is you need to do to take care of yourself today. This is breathtaking. And I know I'm pretty pissed. So there's that.